Good morning, Simon. Good to see you with us.
Good morning, Joan, and very nice to see you all and everybody else as well. Yes, I'm well on the road to recovery. I hope that's not tempting face to say that, but thank you for your kind words.
Right, good morning, all. I'd like to begin this meeting by welcoming members and officers and those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. The Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent whilst the meeting is taking place? To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I will ask all members of the board who have video cameras to keep their video camera switched on and to keep their microphone muted except when I invite them to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the usual
Can anybody hear
way.
me? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you, Councillor Seif. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function in the right-hand side of their screen. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. I would ask for your patience if we run into technical problems, and should this occur, I will declare an adjournment whilst the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. So, Sophie, do we have any reports of apologies for absence?
No apologies were received, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm now online. Sorry, I wasn't before. So I don't know if you were thinking that we were not quorate because I couldn't get in. Sorry, Dennis.
That's absolutely fine. The quorum for the meeting, just for your information, is remarkably light. It is one employer representative and one employee representative. We now have the luxury of 3 employer reps, so no fear.
Okay.
Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Thank you. I will take no show of hands as an answer there. I would now like to move on to the minutes of the meeting. We are being asked to approve the minutes as a correct record. If you want to raise anything relating to the confidential part of that meeting, can I suggest that we discuss them once we are in confidential session at the end of this meeting? Please note that the comments made be regarding the accuracy of the minutes only. Does anyone have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? I have just one, which is that I should be in the minutes as an employer representative rather than an employee representative, but I've already passed that to Sophie. Are there any other comments on the accuracy? Okay, so no comments on that basis. The recommendation to approve the minutes is carried. There is an action log. Does any member have any questions on that action log? My apologies. There is one item where the first item, there were comments on the valuation over funded position regarding full council. I was in touch with the chair of the pension fund committee, who replied as follows. I'm not convinced highlighting the rules at this time would be beneficial, although there will be a point when this is useful. What happened at the full council meeting was that certain members were seeking a way to raid the pension fund for the purpose of propping up the council finances. This would not be a prudent action. The fund valuation is an artificial figure based on guesses at a stream of future unknowns. It would be foolish to make significant changes to the fund based on these artificial measurements, and even more foolish to highlight the process that needs to be gone through. There are already companies out there who are offering this service. I did point out to the chair of the committee that actually it's not possible to raid the fund in any way as suggested, but I got no response to that. Personally, it seems to me that it would be useful for a more complete understanding of how the fund works for councillors. But having had that exchange, I feel I am now at a loss to take that forward, and would leave it with perhaps yourself, Councillor Seif, since you raised it, or Councillor King, if you want to take it further forward.
Well, I certainly don't want to take it further forward at this time. I think I agree with the comments of the chair of the pension fund committee that the valuation is at a given particular point in time. I mean, I suppose if there is a permanent surplus, that might be the time to look at whether there's a used the term raiding. I'm not sure that. I mean, if people take funds from the pension fund and put them into the businesses, and this doesn't apply to a pension fund like the Cambridgeshire pension fund, but when a company does it, and I have seen them do it, it is in order to keep the company going so that pensioners and employees benefit and their sustainability. But I don't think that's I mean, the reason it was raised, I think, and Simon can confirm this, was should we add it to our reserves given to cover all the risks, and it was not appropriate to do so at this given point in time. So I don't think we need to make further inquiries. But I mean, if at some point or other there's hundreds of millions of pounds in excess, I suppose it could be looked at.
Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is something that periodically is raised, and no doubt it will be raised again in the future. And I think that given where we are, there's little point in doing this now, because obviously there will be a new council in about a year's time. So, and I'm sure, well, I suspect that it will be raised again then. So I think we'll just move on. Thank you.
Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for absolute clarity, there is no ability whatsoever for a active employer to get any surplus back. The triennial valuation process obviously sets rates every 3 years for the intervaluation period, and so the only possible thing that can happen is where there's an exceptionally good funding position is that the rates could go down. But for absolute clarity, there is no ability for anything other than an exiting employer to get a return of surplus.
And the county council can't exit.
No, the county council is a scheduled body,
Yes.
and they legally have to have their staff within the LGPS.
I didn't put it quite as definitively as you could have, Mark, but I did try to convey that to the chair. Anyway, are there any other matters people wish to raise on the matters arising? So we will take the action log, therefore, as noted. Thank you very much. Item 3 is the administration report. Michelle, I believe that one is over to you to present.
Yes, thank you. So I will just pull out the key details of this report. So the first topic I just wanted to touch on was with the pension service KPIs in the report in Appendix 1. So as you'll see, overall, the KPIs have generally improved, and this was since we increased the target from 5 working days to 10 working days for the retirement benefits from active employment. That was agreed by the pension committee in December. So as you can see across the board, most of those KPIs have now turned to green. A couple of isolated incidents with the award of dependent benefits. But one area that we're still working towards is the estimates. As you'll see, we've got 1 red and 1 amber for the period there. So this is predominantly, or has been, to do with the level of sickness, since that particular KPI has been changed to take the pressure off in other areas. So across November, December and January in the operations team alone, there was 79.5 days worth of sickness recorded for that period. So as you can see, quite a significant impact. It's meant that resources from other teams have obviously been diverted as appropriate to make sure that we're undertaking our most important critical roles, which is obviously to pay pensioners and continuity of income, which is why the estimate of benefits out of everything that we do have a slightly lower priority than some of the other areas. The sickness position at the moment, some of it has naturally resolved, but there are pockets that are still ongoing. Some of that is being formally managed, so we will just need to keep an eye on that going forward, and obviously try and balance our resources as much as possible and catch up a bit on some of the estimates where they've fallen a bit below the target. And in addition, as we've mentioned before, the team in general are quite inexperienced. So we're obviously dealing with that as well. And there's some recruitment and some vacancies in certain areas as well. One thing that you'll see as we go through the agenda pack that was approved by a pension committee as part of the business plan was a training officer position. And part of that is to help alleviate some of the pressure as well across the casework teams. Because what we're finding is, because the team's so inexperienced, the time and resource obviously to put into really good consistent training is obviously draining resource there as well. So hopefully the addition of a training officer that will take some of that pressure off as well will also help. So moving on to the customer journey KPIs, as you'll see, we've continued to progress in this area. Every KPI has some activity going on, with the exception of the death benefits KPI, which is one that we're currently looking at reviewing all the processes within that area. So we need to be able to obviously do that first before we can allocate the appropriate trigger points and pension sharing cases. We get very few of those and they're currently on hold due to GAD factors anyway, but those are the two that we will look to bring you at the earliest point that we can. We've obviously spoke about these ones before in terms of some of these KPIs are quite complex in the way that there can be multiple parties involved with multiple trigger points all concurrently happening at the same time. So for the retirement ones, for example, so we've tried to streamline the comments this time to make it a little bit more clear in what we're actually trying to say. But the ultimate goal is to identify in the future where we have any systemic employer issues. And what we would like to be able to do then is say, you know, this KPI was an issue in this particular month. We identified this particular issue was happening with this employer, and this is the resolution, and this is what we've done about it, is effectively where we want to go with that. Probably appreciating that these are very unlikely to be 100% all the time, but I think it's more about doing what we can to be proactive to make the experience as best as we can for our members. And then just really a comment on the breaches of the law. As you all know, we've been reporting the 5-year statutory period for the refund of contributions period for quite some time now. We've said for quite a while that the removal of that regulation is likely to come in from DLUC. We have heard, and just really for information purposes, that is likely to move to 2025 now until till DLUC start to look at that. So unfortunately, that comment will be on the report, and those breaches will be on the report for the remainder of this year. And the final thing I was just going to comment on, just bearing in mind, obviously it's a confidential appendix, but just to draw your attention, obviously with one employer that we had some difficulty getting the contributions there, but obviously as per the report, the payments are now all up to date. But apart from that, happy to take any questions.
Councillor Safe.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Thanks very much. I read this report, and as I was reading it, we are looking at KPIs, and KPIs themselves, it seemed to me, don't mean that much, particularly as we're dealing with pretty small numbers. So I can't remember which one it was, because I can't do this and keep the report up at the same time. But just a couple of non-compliances and take or underperformances give you a score that is under the target. So it would be, in the first instance, very helpful to know just how much under target some of these things are, rather than just simply saying, now, I don't know what sort of detail we need to go into that, but I mean, if you're just a couple of days over, it seems to me that although you've technically not met the KPI, you're actually doing a pretty good job anyway. But then I thought about what's the context of this, and it took me until the business plan, reading through the whole agenda, to find out exactly how many companies that we deal with. Maybe we've all had this information before, and how many individual members are members of the scheme, which sort of puts the 25 issues that you've had to deal with into some sort of context. And it would be very, very helpful if in future this particular report could just state those numbers, i.e. the number of companies in the scheme or organisations in the scheme, the number of members you're dealing with. And in particular, I note from the actuaries report that comes much later, that, over the years, the numbers are expected to grow probably exponentially. So, if we have some sort of comparison of how that numbers are growing, absolute numbers at the start of this particular report, I would find it very helpful, because otherwise I've had to plough through the rest of the agenda to find out what the context of. Now, I don't know if other people have encountered that sort of not not confusion, but just the understanding of what the context is. So I'd just take other people's views, of course, as to whether they would find that helpful. Can I also just add while I'm talking, I think it's Appendix 3 on the statutory breaches. I don't think we have that appendix. In fact, the appendices are not numbered correctly. I think the the late collections was 4, or should have been 4, and it appears as 3, something like that. Again, I don't know whether it's important that those non-material statutory non-compliances as an appendix is that important, but it's not there, or it wasn't there in my copy at any rate.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I absolutely agree on your first point with some of the KPIs. When we are dealing with smaller volumes, it doesn't take many of those to be out to obviously, have a more significant impact on those, and push them into ambers and sometimes reds. But overall, obviously, the KPIs that we've got in the larger volumes hopefully give a bit more of an indication. And the smaller ones do tend to be where a process has broke down in a particular way. And it's just really make sure that we're prioritising effectively. Your second comment about having general information in the report, we have that information anyway. If other board members would like to see that in there as well, I've got no problem adding a paragraph at the beginning just to set the current context of, the employers in the fund, just so that context is within that report to make it a bit easier to read as well. And just on the third point, apologies if there is any discrepancies before about the references to the appendices. I'll have a look in detail afterwards. But yeah, and if it is incorrect, we'll obviously get it reflected in the minutes what they should have said.
The appendices appear correct to me, but please do check. Val?
Sorry.
Val, are you able? Your hand is up. Are you muted?
Hold on.
No,
I couldn't get the unmute button to come up properly. Michelle, just on Appendix 2, this is me just skimming this. I know these are all in, sort of in development at the moment, customer journeys, but some of them, it's not really that meaningful for me. It says a percentage within target. It doesn't actually say what the target is. And I think the whole report just needs to be a bit more meaningful, and maybe some, sort of, I'm sure you're thinking about this at the moment. And that's really probably the only thing I have to say. I need to be able to really understand more that's what's going on with these figures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we've kind of said from the beginning of this journey almost, that I think we're one of the first funds to kind of be looking at these customer journey specific KPIs. And as you can imagine, it does get quite complex when we're trying to capture and all the trigger points going on for that. But yes, I think in theory, the target for these ones, because they're statutory KPIs, is 100%. However, as I kind of mentioned earlier, because of all the components within those and some of the issues that we encounter, obviously we're not looking at our own performance within these. We're looking at multiple. We're talking partly of the employers as well, which can be issues, but we're also talking about the members themselves. There could be delays within those processes for not getting forms back in time and things like that. But I absolutely take on board your comment about trying to make the report as meaningful as possible. And we are kind of continually reviewing the wording and what we can report to you. So we'll keep that in mind for the next report as well, and see what further information we could possibly provide on that.
Okay, just one example, you know, I'm taking the first line, the 46% in January within target. It's like, how many does this relate to? You know, sort of 46% of only sort of 5 is, you know, is different to 46% of 20, if you get what I mean.
Right. Okay. So if we basically have a look at a bit more contextual information about the volumes as well. Yeah, we'll have a look at that, see if there's anything we can do
Right.
for that next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Val. Mark, you have.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was just going to respond to Councillor Seif's comment around the, if you like, the context. Long-standing members may recall that we started adding context at the request of a former member of the board, because we do tons and tons of calculations, obviously, only some of which are actually measured through key performance indicators. And that's obviously the reason at the beginning of this report we put that volume in. I think it was 5,000, and we stated this time round. And to add further context, we also gave a customer, if you like, a customer rating from our short form surveys that we issue as well. But as Michelle says, it's no problem to add additional static information in that we have each quarter. But just a reminder that context was put in there because the KPIs certainly don't give the whole picture of what we do.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Seif asked whether anyone had any objection to making the changes that he suggested. I have no problem with that at all. If Michelle is happy to do it and it's not going to adversely affect her workload. So, yeah, I'm very happy with that. I also have just a question about the amber and the red. You reassured us that this was being addressed, Michelle. Do you have any timescale for when you hope to get us all to green? Thank you.
Well, I think originally when we were tracking sickness levels and really waiting to see how quickly we came out of that position with long-term sickness, because some of that is going on and continuing to go on, it's very difficult to say at what point we're expecting those to go green. However, I think the important thing from an assurance point of view is that we are managing that situation. At the moment, we've already changed the structure slightly within the operations team, so there's a bit more resilience in there. With the training officer post, that'll also build some extra resilience. I don't know if Mark wants to commit to an actual point, but I don't think I probably could do at this point in time. But we're certainly working towards it.
I would never commit to being all green. I mean, literally one case can be delayed and it changes an indicator. So I think what I would say is I would hope to see our retirements stay green, or as green as they possibly can be, because that's where we're parachuting support in as needed. But the reality is, even with that, all it takes is for someone to be someone you're going to expect to do that to be off on a given day, and you've got you know, you're through a weekend and missed a payroll deadline or something like that, and you've got an issue. So I think you know, we want the really critical indicators, so the ones which are around benefits being put into payment, to be as green across the board as they possibly can be. We are unfortunately having to have a bit of a mixed bag on things like estimates. But again, I think it's fair to say, because we look at two funds, we can look across the two funds, and we have got a bit of variable experience across the two funds, not through the way we're processing differently, but just simply because if you know, a lot of estimates come in for a particular fund on a given day, and then some come in, a few are coming for another fund a few days later, we do tend to prioritise them in the order they come in, and that can lead to differential performance. But yeah, I mean, we're obviously doing the best we can. I think sorting sickness can be a medium-term thing to sort out. We have got, for example, a senior team leader returning later in the year from maternity that we haven't been able to cover. So hopefully we'll see the picture improve. But having said that, you know, we do two funds. I think 4 out of 14 indicators were not green across those 2 funds. So just 4 out of 14, and only 1 of those indicators was red in the latest month that we're reporting.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair, and also echo your thanks to Mark. I'm not, as I said at the outset, you know, I'm reassured by it. I was just asking if there was if there was a time scale set on this. Can I just suggest picking up what you said, Mark, about some of the indicators being more important than others? Would it be possible for you to indicate those to us so that, you know, it's a bit clearer? Because I forget from one meeting to another which indicators you consider more important than the others. So I would personally find that very helpful if you could just maybe put them in bold or something like that. Thank you.
Yeah, we can flag the ones that report to actual cash flow to members, which I think is what we're saying, or to beneficiaries. Sorry.
Barry, you had a point.
Yeah, I did raise in our pre-meeting, just to give some context, Unison sort of reached out to me because they were quite frustrated and how long they're getting information about estimates. And just to clarify, at the time I was a bit unsure what they were talking about, but apparently it was ill health estimates. And I know the KPIs that have slipped to relate to member requested estimates. But I was just thinking from a customer journey point of view, that's not really covered, the employer requested ones, but it is part of that customer journey. So I believe the frustration is that they've been told like you'd have to wait 6 weeks, and of course they're trying to seek advice like from the union on how to proceed. So I just wonder whether that would be considered in the future and as part of a sort of customer journey KPIs, even the employer requested estimates.
If I may, Chair, that is not what the official line would be at all from the service. So we will address that within the service, particularly because you said it's ill health, which we would absolutely prioritise anyway. So I'm not sure whether that's through an inexperienced member of the team, but we will pick that up and make sure that doesn't happen. With employer estimates, if there is a bulk request, then what we do is we agree a specific timescale for those estimates with that employer. It hasn't in the past been as high, even that's not been as high as 6 weeks ordinarily, but certainly we'll have to pick this up.
My understanding is it's not the service's fault, it's what employers are telling. Say, oh, it'll be 6 weeks. So
okay.
But it's still part of, if you get what I mean, it's still part of that customer's journey and expectation.
Okay, understood.
Councillor Safe.
Yeah, it's possibly a silly question. Jumping ahead, we're talking, I mean, well ahead in the agenda. We talk about a digitalised portal, which consultants are developing to allow, presumably, members to access and interrogate their own pension arrangements and presumably get estimates. I don't know. Would that take a lot of the heat out of some of these KPIs? I mean, or at least raise some of the pressure on some of the staff and the time it takes to get information to them. So in a way, that may resolve the question that Simon has posed. How long will it be until we get all greens? I don't think it's going to answer every question. I understand that, but it may take some of the pressure. Presumably, that's why it's being developed.
Yes, I'm sure Corey will come in here, but effectively we already
Corey
have
has his hand up
that
already.
mechanism in place. So we do have a facility through the current arrangements through member self-service to do estimates. Depending on how close somebody is to retirement will depend on whether they use that member self-service or come through to the team. But that facility is there, which is why that KPI, because there is another mechanism in place. Where it really impacts the team is when retirements are coming up within 12 months or so. And as rightly said, the employer ones as well. But Corey, I don't know if you want to come in on that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So yeah, I was just going to say that the facility does exist at the moment, and members can actually run redundancy retirement calculations as part of that as well. Obviously, we would never expect them to make full financial decisions based on that, because we need to check that the pay is right and various other things. But in terms of an order of magnitude and having initial discussions with the union, that is something that they should be able to do on the back of those estimates. Employers also have the ability to run these estimates themselves through iConnect. And we do encourage them, if they need to do it as a matter of speed, they can do that themselves at their own pace. If they've got a bulk job and they do want us to have a look at it because they want a little bit more accuracy, they want us to check the data, then as Mark suggested, we usually agree a turnaround time with them for that, and my team would manage the liaison between the operations team and the employers on that. Barry, I fully appreciate what you're saying about the member experience. I think the problem for us is we don't know when that conversation starts with the employer. So we wouldn't be able to time that full experience. Only at the point that we get informed a member wants those calculations would be able to have a look. So I think there is some problematic positions with that, but we certainly do work with employers to get a quick turnaround time where we can.
Thank you very much. We have been asked to note the administration performance report, and I think we've fairly thoroughly done that. So thank you. I'll move on then to item 4, is the business plan and medium-term strategy. Mark, can I ask you to introduce this report, please?
Of course, thank you, Chair. So obviously this addresses both the end of year position for 23-24 in terms of particularly the activities, as well as what was agreed ultimately by the Pensions Committee in terms of the new year's business plan. So the end of year position, there was referring to the Appendix 1, which was the RAG status of those activities. I think there's only one additional activity which turned amber, so there was 4. The 3 we had discussed, and the committee were completely aware of the status of those. The website at the last minute turned amber. The digital team was using an outsourced contractor to develop the website, and they had some resource issues in January, and that meant that we weren't able to get our test website ready. It is now ready, and we've obviously launched some pages and shared them, I think, with members. Corey is busy signing off the web pages as they're being developed by our communication specialists, as well as obviously some technical staff within the pension service. So it was just simply we weren't quite as far through the project at the end of the year as we expected, but we still expect that website will still launch this year. And Corey will pick that up, I think, through the communication plan as well, through some activities in there. The GMP rec, I didn't move over to the New Year business plan. That is just I'm just tracking that though, and we'll let you know when that's completed. It will complete around about the end of Q1 this financial year. So that didn't go into the new year, the new plan, but will conclude this year. The financials are obviously in the new business plan. Obviously, it has the prior year. It has the what we're projecting. You will see those final figures come through when we present the annual report. So that goes to, I think it goes first, obviously, to the Pensions Committee at its annual meeting. So those will be the first time you have sight of the final financials, but then they'll be reflected in each business plan update as well. In terms of the new business plan, I would, in terms of activities, there's just a couple I want to flag. pension dashboards, there's a couple of activities on the plan. One is procurement of a integrated service provider, which is effectively the supplier that helps us connect to the dashboard ecosystem. So between our Altair system and the dashboard ecosystem where the data is sent to, we are going to be using our existing software supplier for that. We were quite transparent when we did the software procurement last year, but we weren't able to finalise the contractual position because the government reset the dashboard programme and threw things out somewhat. So we are in the process of sorting that out contractually at the moment. And then the other activity is around all the project work that needs to be done to undertake the task to put the dashboard in place locally. Michelle will pick up on that dashboard in her governance report in a moment. There is a couple of other things I just wanted to flag. Revisiting multiple investment strategies. So multiple investment strategies whereby different scheme employers, if you like, in buckets, could have different strategies with different levels of risk. We are going to explore that again. It wasn't of any material benefit the last time we looked at it, but it was flagged by our actuary at the time that if the financial circumstances changed, then it may be worthwhile again. So we've got a two-stage process just to make sure the climate has changed, and then secondly, if it has, we'll put a proposal to the committee to explore that with some costings. And then I think a big decision for the committee will be around the investment consultant. So currently Mercer, we're tying that to the investment consulting objectives review, which goes to the annual meeting of the fund in July. And depending on the outcome of that objectives review, will determine whether the committee have an appetite to extend the contract or to test the market for a reprocurement. So that's the activities. Just a final few points. We did at the same time as seeking agreement for the business plan, we did ask the committee to agree for us to join Pensions for Purpose, which is if you like, a community, a network that provides resource to do with sustainable and impact investing. It's obviously very much tied to the activities of the fund at the moment. It's a free thing to sign up for, but it does, you do have your name on the register if you agree to join as a fund. So therefore I did take that through the committee process to seek agreement. And then finally, just around the resourcing, the paper did include a request for a modest amount of additional resource to deal with everything that's going on within the business plan, equivalent to 2 to 3 junior posts per fund. It's 2-point-odd posts per fund. It isn't making a material impact on the staffing costs, albeit you will see they have gone up within the business plan. The majority of that increase is not to do with that; it's to do with the annual inflationary uplift and any incremental uplifts on staffing. That's led to the majority of that increase. That's everything I have to say up front, but happy to take any questions, of course.
Councillor Steve.
Thank you. Well, I've got one request and one question that's probably I should know the answer. I've obviously been a member of the committee now, or the pension board for a year, and I've probably not thought to answer this question before, but I probably should have done, particularly as I'm a member of the Audit and Accounts Committee. And I just wonder what the council's exposure to the actions of the pension fund is and what it extends to. Now, that's a big question. Please don't answer that now. But just to confirm something for me, all salary costs are paid out of the fund's income. I think the business plan shows that clearly. And the council itself recovers, as the figures show, about 500,000 a year in terms of overhead. At the moment, is that the only financial relationship between the council I mean, and the fund. So that's one question. I hope that's understood as it is. The other point when I'm talking, so there's a second question, it's quite separate. Have we as a board been shown the design or given any access to the website that is being developed? I'm talking about beta copies of it, or even just the design, what might be presented in it. We've talked about it quite extensively, but at the moment I have no idea what it contains. I'd quite like to see something. Where you mentioned that pages are being released. It might be helpful if we just have a sort of little presentation of what will be in the website. So that's a request, really. Unless people have had it, I don't know whether we've had it in the past.
I will let Corey come in on that second point. I'll just answer the first. The admin authority is a really important party in the running of a pension fund, because it has obviously a really, it is responsible for the fund, and ultimately it's responsible for obviously making sure that if there was ever any shortfall, then they are the responsible party along with the other employers. But in terms of explicitly the impact in terms of costs, the employer rate does include effectively the admin costs within it. So it was a fraction of a percent is effectively the admin costs of the fund. So every valuation, the actuary works out what the projected management administration costs are and loads that onto the employer rate. So if we increase our costs, that does increase the proportionally increase the cost. It does increase the rate for each employer. The largest employers will pay more because it's taken as a percentage of salary. So obviously the Cambridgeshire County Council would carry the majority of that. But I think it's fair to say that obviously the costs attributable to local government pension schemes, there's a lot of pressure with everything government is asking us to do now compared to what they did ask us to do, say, 10 years ago. So we do keep a close eye on that and try to keep it as low as possible. The pressure on every fund is that every year we have more members, because active members leave and they become either deferred members or they become pensioner members, and eventually the deferred members become pensioner members, and that process means we grow our pensioners by 1 to 2,000, let's say, a year. Our deferred members will go up by X thousand a year, and the active members will stay pretty much static. So there's constant pressure that you need to deal with, and so if you stand still on resources, you're doing very well, because it means you're introducing efficiencies to do so. But I'll hand over to Corey to answer that, who that website's been circulated to.
The survey has been circulated to both members of the board and the committee. So if you haven't had a copy of that, do let me know, and I can make sure that that's sent out to you. I believe we had some comments come back from the chair, so I'm quite confident that was sent to the mailing list that we have for the board. But I can check to make sure there's not an outdated list that's being used or something like that by mistake. But we are very much welcoming thoughts and comments on the website. It is being developed in line with our digital team here at West Northampton, also some external branding and design house in Northampton. So we are getting expert advice on the build of that as well, and we are looking to keep that as much in line as possible with the accessibility standards that are required of councils. I say as much as possible because there are some things that just are not always in our control to achieve. So where they are in our control, we will put those in place and then work on the other things as well. So you should get a flavour of what's going to be on the website. There's limited pages on that test website at the moment, but all of the headings and the topic subjects that will be included on the website are visible. So you can see the kind of things that we're looking to talk about with members.
Fair enough. I'm pretty well. I know I haven't seen it. I may have missed the emails. I don't know when it was sent around, but could I ask you to just email me and I'll look at it out of interest. And thank you, Mark, as well for your explanation. I'll think further on it anyway. Thanks.
Before I note the hands. I just want to check something with Mark, if I may. It says county council overhead recovery. I was assuming that was West Northamptonshire Council rather than anything to do with Cambridgeshire. Is that correct?
So we obviously have costs actually associated with both admin authorities. So when I say admin authorities, I mean the actual organisation itself. So that will include statutory officers, democratic services, audit teams, things like that.
Property costs as well.
Yeah. What we effectively do is we total them up, work out what the attribution is between each authority, and then it's up to obviously the arrangement between the two lead authority services as to how they agree to share that between the two authorities. But we make sure we have the right amount deducted from the fund. Where it goes to is not my decision, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much.
So sorry, just to clarify, what you're seeing is what's deducted. Sorry, what you're seeing on that report is what's deducted from the fund. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Val.
Thank you, Dennis. Mark, just a couple of points. Appendix 1, the complete the guarantee minimum pension rectification. I know you said that the project is due to finish on the 30th of June and would not feature in the 24-25 business plan. And I just wondered, what was your thought process over that? Because I don't want it to just get lost, you know, sort of from our reporting.
I have committed to track it and confirm once it's complete. I thought it was going to finish a bit earlier, but what we did at so obviously the gestation period for these reports is months. So we're finalising this well over a month before the committee. What we had to do is, because of the pressures, we had to move some that resource was doing that, and so I expected to be a couple of weeks over at the last minute to do something else, and therefore it was delayed. So I thought it was just going to conclude at the first couple of weeks, but I've checked yesterday, and we're on track for the end of the first quarter. But I have said I will confirm once it's complete. So probably I'd say that's going to be it's possibly the June paper, but if not, the paper after that going to committee and board.
Okay. And next point, Mark, you mentioned that you're getting 2 to 3 extra junior posts for the work on the 24-25 business plan. It's really, I just wonder if this is going to exacerbate the issues that was reported in the administration report regarding, you know, training, and actually, you know, a couple of junior posts would, to me, you may put me wrong here, more inexperienced staff. And I just wonder if you're sort of making the problem sort of worse, getting more junior staff rather than some more experienced staff coming in.
Sorry, when I say junior, they are mainly pensions officers. I think there's or in and around that level. I think the training officer is more of a team leader level, and so that is a more experienced role. But the rest of the posts are what I would say more junior grades. I mean, but that's what we need. I mean, we need people to do the work, because it's a you know, the resourcing required to process X thousand cases. It is pensions officer grade jobs, and I can't get around that. You're right, it does create a pressure. That pressure is we're attempting to get consistency in training and try to alleviate some of the pressure on individual team leaders and within teams by having a central person to do a lot of the training and support. But you know, that person's got to come from somewhere as well. I don't think there's any way around this. There's not the ability for me to go to market and just pull experienced pensions officers, because the industry doesn't support that. Okay. If I wanted to, for example, outsource an area of work like we've tried in the past, so, you know, for example, use a consultant to process X thousand cases, they would have to go to market and find someone to recruit to do that work, so that there is a shortfall of experienced, you know, pension professionals within the marketplace.
Okay, and obviously the consultants will charge you far more.
If you are, well, yes, I mean, it's and I think then you get into difficulties with, for example, the relationship between the fund and employers who provide data, and how does a provider interact in the same way as we do. It gets very.
I get that. Okay, all right. Thank you, Mark, for that.
All right.
Yeah, a few points here. So I know we discussed in the pre-meeting about pensions for purpose, and you've already explained that it's free. But I think I also, just for sort of openness, I also just raised the question, were any alternatives explored? And I think you did explain in the pre-meeting.
I mean, it's a very niche area, obviously, and these are right at the forefront in terms of this. I mean, if you've been to a what's the word, a conference or a seminar, then there's a good chance you probably have heard from Pension for Purpose, because they are at the forefront. I mean, this will not necessarily be the final thing we seek to sign up for, but what we are doing is in a very controlled way, and reflecting what we need at any given point in time. Obviously, the other thing we're looking to sign up to, completely different, obviously, is the stewardship code. So we're seeking to put an application in with the FRC any week now. We're doing it by the end of May, having got approval at the last committee.
My other point, Dennis did sort of highlight it in our pre-meeting, but it's just so that people know that it's been picked up. But 5.3, in the same section on pensions for purpose, the last line says, hence the reason for a board decision, but I know it's supposed to be committee decision. So I believe you picked that up already. And then I had one other date typo that I spotted. So I know it's page 73 of my papers. It is in a confidential section, but the very last section of that page, it's about investigating cyber insurance. There's a line that says no update was available for December 2024. My guess is it's supposed to be December 2023.
Yeah, sorry, Barry. I actually noticed that myself after we had the pre-meet as well. So yeah, definitely incorrect.
Councillor King.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, these are just a couple of things that I think might be typos. I'm looking at page 62 of my pack. That's the climate action plan, and under Q2 2023, it's blank, and there are ticks everywhere else. And also looking down a bit further, there's a blank at Q4 2023, and nothing is ticked for Q1 2024. Whereas, of course, we are now in Q2 2024. So just wondered if those were typos or if there was a particular reason why they were not ticked.
So in terms of then they are not ticked if we haven't completed the action. What we are doing is representing what we presented to the pension committee.
Okay.
In terms and that at that point in time, when we were preparing it, the Q1 activities we were at the beginning of Q1, so that's the reason they were blank. We have actually, just by way of update, I mean, the Q4 activity, we did put a proposal to the ISC around something which would fit within a sustainable impact investing slot, and that what they want to do is they want to see what the actual manager in that area is. It's social and affordable housing. I don't think there's any secret about we're exploring that. So we have done some progression of that one, but we will update at a future committee everything for Q1 2024.
And Mark, what about Q2 2023? Engage with private asset managers?
We have actually that was delayed, but we have have undertaken that work for a paper that's going to the next ISC. So as I think as everybody is aware, we've done carbon reporting around listed equity so far. And what we are seeking to do is obviously to expand that into other asset classes. And part of that was that action. So that action was delayed, but is now complete. It wasn't when we originally drafted this way back at the very beginning of 2024.
That's good to hear, and thank you for the reassurance, Mark.
Mark, can I just check? When you are talking about Q1 2024, you are talking about the financial year and not the calendar year?
No. Whenever we quote a year, it will always be relevant to that calendar year. If we quote 23-24, for example, it will be relevant to the financial year. So it is exactly as it reads. Yeah.
So yes. Okay. Thank you. Right. I see no new hands up. So the board is being asked to note the status of the 23-24 business plan and activities and current financial position. Note the contents of the business plan and medium-term strategy 24-25. And to note the membership application to Pensions for Purpose on behalf of the fund. I think we've fairly thoroughly done that. So thank you. We have achieved that target. Item 5 is the governance and compliance report. Michelle, can I ask you to briefly introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you. So really, I just wanted to pull out two main elements within this report where actually most of our activity is focused at this point in time. The rest of the report hopefully speaks for itself. So I just wanted to elaborate a bit more on dashboards, as Mark mentioned earlier. A lot is happening currently in the world of dashboards, following on from the DWP releasing their ministerial statement on the 25th of March. So the awaited connection guidance has been released, which includes the new staging timeline for connecting to the dashboards. And obviously you'll remember from last year, everything was put on a project hold and everything was reset. So now that we've got this information, we can obviously start moving forward with the dashboard project further. So the statement effectively confirmed that all schemes and providers are legally required to be connected to the dashboard by the 31st of October 26, which was the bit we did already know. The bit that in terms of the staging guidelines, which was the part that we were specifically waiting for. So for all public service pension schemes, this is confirmed as the 31st of October 25. So by this date, everything needs to be in place for testing. So the intention is for us particularly that everything will be ready by that 25 date, and it gives then a year of testing with the ISPs and the connections to test that. And effectively, depending on how that testing goes, the Secretary of State will then make a decision on when the dashboards will be available to the public. So we've obviously looked at our project plans based on this new information, completely mapped the activities against the connection guidance. One key theme that is coming out of that is about the record keeping of decisions. So every decision that's made, we just need to have a log of that. Pension regulator still very strongly saying that to not have regard to the guidance will be deemed as a breach of the law. And, you know, if there are any delays to the connection, there needs to be a substantial reason. The reason that they have not made that element statutory is to allow for circumstances where schemes would struggle to do that, and that would be obviously assessed by its own merit. Things like if you're responsible for several schemes joining at the same time, or you're just about to have a change in administration or software providers and that type of thing. But apart from that, the intention is that everybody is expected to join and connect by the prescribed staging timescale. You'll see in Appendix A, we've provided an update to the checklist. And as Mark has already mentioned, we'll be closely monitoring this through the business plan activities, obviously the ISP, but also just the work that's going on behind the scenes in terms of the data cleansing and the actions that we're taking with that as well. So the second topic I just wanted to give a little bit more context around was the general code of practice. So we've spoken about this before and obviously been waiting for this to come into play. So this is now in force. We're now in receipt of the Hyman's compliance checker tool, which summarises the code of practice and all the areas within it. Effectively, there's 15 areas with multiple requirements within those areas, as we've discussed before, things like knowledge, risk, cyber. So the way it's structured is it's split into regulatory requirements, pension regulator expectations and best practice. So obviously our first point of call is to look at all those regulatory requirements and make sure that we're robust and undertake the appropriate work, and more importantly, making sure that we're evidencing correctly and that we have everything in place. So possibly the meeting after June, we're hoping to have at least the regulatory compliance that we can bring to you. And obviously, if there are anything that we're falling short of, there will be an action plan attached to that also. But just bearing in mind, obviously, it was a consolidation of the previous code. So we're not expecting masses of work off the back of this. But I think it's probably worth noting that obviously the work to actually undertake the compliance is where, you know, resource needs to be spent just to make sure that we can do that effectively. The only other small things to mention, obviously under section 8, we've got the usual policy and strategy updates just for you to note there. And just a comment about skills and knowledge. So we are starting to approach the 12-month point. Madalena has sent individual emails round now just to remind people, obviously, of anything outstanding. We didn't want to leave that to the last minute. So we've given 3 months, hopefully enough time for everybody to complete those modules. In addition, I don't know if you remember, but in line with the training strategy that we approved, the committee approved last year, and obviously you fed into, we will also be sending round a questionnaire in July as well, just to see how members are finding the online platform, whether, you know, just some general information back on that. And obviously will give us a bit of a flavour about how we look to do any refresh of training in the future as well. But apart from that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Simon, your hand is up. Is that a historic hand or do you have a question?
My apologies, Chair. Yes, that is a legacy hand, and I'm sorry.
No problems. No problems at all. Are there any questions on this report and Michelle's presentation? Excellent, Michelle. No questions at all. Thank you very much indeed. The board is being asked to note the governance and compliance report, and that we have done. Item 6 then is the communication plan. Corey, are you able to introduce this report, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a report presenting to you the communications plan that was agreed by the committee at its meeting in March. It's being provided to you post-scrutiny today. Just to take you through the general approach across the year, as you can see from the report and the plan, Q1 and Q2 of the year, the scheme year, when I say Q1 and Q2, so starting April in my mind, is going to be spent focusing on the website. So as Mark said earlier on, I'm busy approving web pages at the moment. They're being developed by my communications officer, Sharon, in conjunction with the subject matter experts where relevant. So we're pushing forward with that quite quickly. We're looking to launch in the summer, and the reason for that is to time that alongside the release of annual benefit statement, which is where we see the most interest and traffic going to our website. So it seems like the best opportunity to really promote the use of that and the new look that's going to be available with that, including the much smoother functionality that members should have. What we're looking to do in Q3 is then focus on embedding our branding guidelines throughout the service. As you know from the business plan, we've got a lot of new people in the service that could probably do with a refresher on the branding guidelines. So Sharon will be taking them through those, as well as the plain language and accessibility requirements that we have within the branding guidelines as well. And then in Q4, we're going to be looking at the enhanced facility that Councillor Seif mentioned earlier on, being produced by Haywards, which effectively we have a version of that now with member self-service, the online pension account. But there is a step change that Haywards are going through at the moment with that, very much in line with our new style of communication as well, where we focus on lifestyle communications. The new facility will provide people a way to look at what their retirement budget should be if they want certain types of lifestyle, and see how their pension benefits compare to that. And then that will then take them through to things that they can do to increase their benefits or any other things like that. Fair to say that it's not ready at the moment as far as we're concerned, particularly for unique challenges for us with multiple funds. So that's why we're reviewing it at the end of the year, just to make sure they've made the improvements that we need in order to take that forward. The only other thing I wanted to mention from the communications plan, because it always comes up as a question, the member satisfaction surveys that you can see happening there every month. Just to reassure you, that isn't something onerous that we're sending out to members all the time, bombarding them with information. This is like the transactional questions that you would get from your bank when you have some activity with them. You get a short text message from them asking you to answer 1 or 2 questions. Ours is an email. It sends them to SurveyMonkey, and there's 1 or 2 questions on there just to try and get a picture of how satisfied they are with those transactions. Nothing else to add to the report, but obviously happy to take any questions that you have.
Corey, it's not just banks, it's the NHS, your dentist. Absolutely everybody wants to know how they're doing. I would guess, Val, you had one from Addenbrooke's as for yesterday, or at least you will do at some point.
I'm sure I will, Dennis, at some point.
So thank you for that introduction, Corey. Members, do we have any questions on the communications plan? I see no hands. I see some shaking heads. So thank you very much, Corey. The board has been asked to note the communications plan, which we have done. And item 7 then is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion report. Michelle, this is a meaty subject. Over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, effectively, EDI has really come into the pension industry more so as a result of the pension regulator guidance that was published last year. And effectively, it's looking at the role of the governing body and why EDI principles are important for the fund. So, excuse me, with this in mind, we've developed an action plan in the appendix in conjunction with Aon, who are governance advisors at the time, to effectively see where we can apply the guidance within the Cambridgeshire Fund, and also had a look at actually whether there was any wider engagement that we could look into as well. So the aim is after the review today and comments, any comments that we take back today to take to the committee in June. And effectively the first part of that journey, as per the plan, we'll start to look at setting up some training for the board and committee members, as it's really important that we obviously all understand what we're talking about and all starting from the same level of knowledge to be able to progress that further. Myself and Madalena have already started looking at the WNC policies from that point of view, and we've booked onto a couple of courses as well to obviously progress that from our end also. I would probably say a slight impact on the effectiveness reviews now. We've obviously been mentioning the effectiveness of reviews have been due, and actually we were all set to do those for the next meeting, but part of this review is actually identifying that we could use that as a mechanism for gathering some information on the board as well. So we're going to speak to our new governance advisors to get some feedback on how we can do that and what's appropriate as part of that effectiveness review. So that will be rescheduled to later in the year, but hopefully be more meaningful in line with what the pension regulator is requesting as well. So effectively, in addition to making sure that we've got adequate representation, we also want to make sure that member engagement is as diverse as possible. So we will be, obviously, once we get those EDI principles in place as part of the plan, we'll be reviewing those and also reviewing against CCC principles as well to make sure that we're obviously aligned in approach. A couple of things that have come to light since the report was published. So there was one other term that is probably worth mentioning as well in terms of EDI, and that's looking at equity when we're talking about EDI as well, to effectively ensure that everybody gets what they need to succeed, recognising that we do not all start from the same place, and effectively whether if somebody does need any reasonable adjustments for whatever reason, that we can look into that to see whether it's viable for the fund to do that. So that is something that I will put in the committee version of the report to make sure that, you know, equality, effectively saying everybody's entitled to the same thing, but actually equity sometimes may come into play, and it's, you know, important that we do consider that as well. And the other thing just to mention was with also the chair actually in the pre-meet has identified about in fund appointments. There's a reference in there about removal to barriers. Obviously we need to identify those first, so I'll put an extra step in the plan there just to make sure that we identify those, and you know, with the caveat of where possible, because certain barriers we you know, elected members, for example, they are in the constitution that they make up, you know, proportions of committee membership, for example. The only other thing I really wanted to mention, and this was more from a national perspective, so obviously everything I've mentioned so far is what we're doing locally for the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund, but really just to mention that the pension regulator has just released its results of its first trustee diversity and inclusion survey. So that effectively confirms that trustees and board members, obviously just bearing in mind it's wider than local government, are less diverse than the overall population. And the three characteristics that were in the report. The top 3 identified was women on boards of 24%, whereas the UK population 52%. This was based on the census, 2021 census, just to put that in context. Age 45, 9% on boards, 44% UK population, and with a disability, 7% on boards and 20% of the population. Just sharing that with you is obviously information from that particular piece of work. If you do want to have a look, they have published it. There's a lot more information on there about other characteristics, and also, but obviously we just need to be mindful, you know, of national developments as well. So yeah, that's the main details of EDI, the plan that we're hoping to take. Obviously welcome any comments that you have on the plan, and we will obviously feed those in when we take it to committee for approval also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Can I remind members that we are specifically being asked to review the proposed actions from Appendix A. So if you have comments on those, that would be great. Councillor Seif.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to say generally, before I turn to a specific question, I very much support EDI. I've done many courses on it. In fact, I'm on the board of on the EDI board, an area of my employer, and I'm not the council. And I know how difficult it can be sometimes. Now, you do have this board has some measure of control, I suppose, on the employees of the fund. I mean, if we thought it wasn't complying with EDI, then we would say so, and we would have some sway in what might happen, or be able to influence it. But I just wonder what this board's influence is with regard to investment, and it's listed, I think, as one of the action items, page 111 in the report, because many of the companies in which we have investments may not comply with EDI. What does this board do about it? I mean, we can ask the investment board to disinvest and find other employers or investments that might meet an EDI standard. But I mean, you know, it's more of what we have at the moment anyway. It's more of a statement of intent and possibly even hope, because not, as you've pointed out, Michelle, most public companies have very few women members on their main board. And should we be doing anything about it? Should we be showing that we do not, or we want to see people working towards much more equitable distribution of board members, for example? That may only be one minor aspect, but I just wonder what this board's powers are in relation to EDI. As a matter of fact, I've got the same question for sustainability and climate change and some other things as well, but we're talking about EDI here, so let's restrict it to that. What are our powers in regard to that policy with respect to investment?
Yeah, Mark, I don't know whether you want to pick up the investment point, because I know you had an example of that you could maybe share. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a number of levers, as it were. So the fund has a investment strategy statement, and included in that is quite a comprehensive RI policy, which is setting out its expectations regarding around ESG, around voting, around engagement. The fund also agreed a set of voting guidelines, which Access proposed. I mean, they actually all worked. I was one of obviously the officers who was in the group that worked on those. And those voting guidelines are effectively a part of every single manager relationship within the Access pool. So the voting guidelines are the way we expect investment managers to vote, and it's a comply or explain regime, and we obviously get reporting back when there's non-compliance, and through investment user groups at within Access, those managers can be challenged. We have individually quarterly meetings with a lot of managers as well at a fund level, and indeed some managers come into the investment subcommittee. We're a member of LAP, and LAP has comprehensive engagement with companies that we own.
Can I interrupt you? I think actually, funnily enough, you have explained this to me previously when I attended as an observer of the investment committee. And thank you very much for saying that. But I really want to know what this board can do. I mean, why are we?
Yeah, so, right. So this board has a role in so in terms of the way it supports the administration. So sometimes it sees strategies and policies in advance, and sometimes it sees them afterwards. But what in the investment space, what you would tend to be involved in would be around the strategies and making sure decisions are being made, taking account of appropriate advice and things like that. So ultimately, yes, it's. I think if you think of the way the LGPS pension world has moved, from local decision to pool-led decision making, obviously the number of levers you have as an individual fund can be seen to have reduced, but we still have our strategies that we have to agree. We still have the policies, and you should be looking at the how decision making has been made.
But we're not actually. What we're doing here is to say, well, we think this is a good policy, but we, as an oversight of the administration of the fund, perhaps I'm being too pedantic here, we can do nothing about it. So if the investment fund does not comply, there's nothing that this board can do to make it comply.
We do take a stewardship report to each investment subcommittee, and you do have access to every single confidential paper, obviously. So that gives reporting on effectively what's going on. So everything I've just described, there will be high level reporting of that and examples of engagement. And we have obviously we do openly say to each time that's presented, we're happy for anyone to interrogate about any of the engagements that have taken place. This is a moving picture, in the sense that I am chairing a group within Access whereby there is further work being undertaken on voting engagement. So we are going to have some, if you like, some further changes to process that will. I can probably pick up on them in a bit more detail actually in the private session when we discuss the Access report. But all I'll say here is that there is further work being undertaken in that space.
I'm sorry, just last word. I won't press it anymore. I think probably if we are setting and agreeing this as a policy, we probably need a statement, perhaps a very simple one sentence that comes back and says, because we can't read all these papers. We're not. I mean, you're quite right. I, as a councillor, can access and observe the pension fund committee and the subcommittee as well, the investment committee. I can do that. I don't necessarily have time to do that, and I'm not actually empowered to do that in a sense. So what I need from you, I think, is a statement that says, yep, they're following this policy, it's fully compliant, or no, they're not, or we found some examples where this particular policy hasn't been followed and we're doing something about it. Something that brings, responds to a policy that we're now being asked to approve as oversight of the administration. Otherwise, well, I say otherwise, it's just a statement of good intent. I think that's, and it's good intent. I've no problem with it, absolutely. But I just wonder what I can do about it, having approved this good intention.
Yeah, the way I would look at it is the fund effectively sets out what it's and feeds into now Access what is its ESG priorities. What is it interested in? What does it want to be included in any future version of the voting guidelines, for example, or any thematic engagements it wants managed to undertake, and then it understands whether those parties are following that. That's obviously where it's that kind of level.
Yeah.
Yes, you can interrogate around any individual stock, but I think you've got to think bigger in terms of a more strategic. And I would say that in terms of the G of ESG, you've got things like board structure, but equality and diversity is absolutely paramount. I almost see that. I don't even see those as almost like engagement priorities, as it were. It's just like a
sine qua non.
The bedrock of a solid company is having that in place.
I totally agree. It's just that I don't know whether, for example, Barry or indeed Dennis has access to the, I don't know who's on the board there, but of the committees, but I can access it. I don't, because I don't have time. And even then I could only access it as an observer. But nevertheless, I'm being asked here to approve a set of policies, which I will hear nothing more about once I've approved them. So I don't know. But let me again think further on that one. It's just that I think I accept your explanation, and I accept that I can do something about it. I just wonder what more, almost having approved a particular set of policies, what we can do to make sure that they are being implemented. So that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seif. I think there's some interesting questions there. And just for your confirmation, as far as I do attend remotely committee and ISC meetings from time to time, and yes, I do have access to all of their papers. Though like you, I'm not sure I read every single word on every one of them. Barry, over to you.
Yeah, just to add to Councillor Seif's points. The role I see us as a pension board can do. Obviously, we've been asked to comment and feed into this policy, but we are in effect a sort of scrutiny committee anyway, so we can ask that to check that once the policy's been approved, that it is being adhered to. We can, question at our board meetings that's sort of our role. That's the power that we have.
Okay, well, that's what I think we should be doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I'll just move on to my other point. So it's more a comment about EDI and especially representation of the governance of our authorities. It's I can see it being very problematic. It's difficult enough to recruit people to the board, and then, as Michelle touched on, certain positions on the board and the committee are filled by councillors, and that's down to the constitution. So it might not necessarily match EDI principles. Also, during our pre-meeting, Mark was explaining that the pensions regulator has been measuring representation on the sort of the national population, whereas reality is we should be measuring how our representation on our scheme members, and that might be quite different to the national population. So it's really my sort of comment on. And then sort of lastly, to get around any issues over representation and not being representative of our scheme members, I think that's where education comes in. So yeah, I see the training as more as the important factor, just so that board members and committee members are fully aware of their membership and their needs, and that's the way that I see to approach it.
Yes, thank you, Barry. I mean, I agree. I think, you know, the guidance is exactly that. It is guidance for us to apply as much as we can within, you know, the remit that we have. I think, you know, starting this action plan is the first step of that, to show that we're obviously, you know, taking the first step to see what is actually possible. And I think it's just more about making sure that we're checking our documentation, our processes, our communications, to make sure that, you know, we're being as inclusive as possible where we can be. In terms of the membership point, I do take that point. The only thing we need to be a little bit careful there is about where we start crossing lines with gathering certain information and how we do that, and GDPR, and should we do that, and all of that information as well. So depending on what's coming out, maybe, you know, in the public arena, we can keep an eye on that. But I think anything further than that, we'll probably take some extra advice just to make sure that we're obviously fully doing what we should be there. But I think the overall intention is to review with everything we do, have EDI in mind, and just be, you know, thinking about, actually, is there anything extra that we can do in this space? Have we phrased this particular communication correctly? Is it in all the places it should be, and that type of thing? But I do take your comments on board.
Thank you, Barry. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I very much agree with what Barry and Michelle have said. I think, just to reassure Councillor Seif, you know, what we have to assume as a board is that once we have agreed a policy or supported one, and the pension committee have also, as the decision-making body, gone along with that, then I think we have to have confidence in our officers that they will implement those. And that is no different from, you know, a business. That's no difference from the way the council works. You know, we are not officers. We are board members, and that's a big difference between our role and the role of Mark and his colleagues. So I think we have to be careful not to cross that line. And also, just to reassure Councillor Seif, it's not by virtue of being a councillor that you have access to all of the papers. All board members do. So regardless of their status, they can attend the virtual meetings or they can attend in person, and they have access to all of the committee and investment committee papers. So coming on to my point, which is specifically to do with the action plan, I have some concerns, Michelle, about the role of the chair, because I've chaired more organizations than I've had hot dinners, almost, and I've attended lots of committees where there have been good chairs and bad chairs. And Dennis, I would just hasten to add, in my opinion, is a very good chair. And I was his predecessor, and I hope I did an equally good job.
Yes, absolutely.
But what I disagree with here is that I don't think the role of the chair is to have skills in debating, challenging, and negotiating maybe. But the most important thing is that the chair should treat everybody and their opinions with respect. And that's the way that you keep an organization, any organization, together. But I think if the chair starts to go down the route of debating and challenging, I think that can easily go overboard and you can actually lose people and put them off. So I think that needs looking at again, Michelle, with respect. And the rest of it, I think, has a lot of good stuff in it. So that's my comment. Anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I am happy to have a look at that wording and come up with some revised wording for the committee approval of that, if everybody else supports that comment as well. I actually do think there is merit in what you've just said, actually, in terms of the wording of that. So if everybody does support that, I can certainly have a look.
I would certainly support what Councillor King has put forward. The other thing that I don't think is obviously stated there is bringing the board to, if not a consensus view, at least a majority view. That we are absolutely required to deliver, and I don't believe it has happened whilst I have been in chair or whilst Simon was, who did an excellent job. But that consensus may need some of those skills there. So I think there is certainly a need for a review of that wording. The other thing, if I may, I'll go just back to Barry's point about education. I think actually leads to a question as to whether we're representatives, which means we understand what our clients are, the people we are representing, i.e. the scheme members. Unless we have an understanding of what they are, what they want and what they need, we would be challenged to represent them. If we can't represent them, then we are actually delegates rather than representatives, and we need to be relatively clear on that. So thank you for that input. Val, over to you.
Hello, I'm just really speaking as the only female member of the board, and I very much have I enjoy this piece of work that I do. I just wonder when the emails go out to pension members, etc., asking, if anyone is actually interested in being a board member. I think I touched on what Michelle actually said about actually looking at the wording again of those adverts as such. I also probably, you may be looking for sort of women or I'm just saying women, I mean that more inclusive, of sort of a certain age, and they're probably going to be a little bit maybe nervous of going for this sort of role. We're not, women as not of my age are probably not as forthright as probably some of the younger women are these days. And you sort of, it's the wording, how, I don't know the answer to this, how to actually encourage other women to apply for roles in the board. Maybe they don't feel they've got the right skills. I don't know what the answer to it is. I don't really know what else I can really say, but, sort of like looking at a application, looking at sort of what the skills are required. Does it go beyond just saying we welcome people from certain ethnic minorities, we welcome people who are disabled, we welcome women? I don't know whether that's enough to encourage, but I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think this action plan obviously starts to look at all those first steps. And obviously when we're talking about communications and, checking against these things, and obviously when we're recruiting as well, even the language we're using, maybe it's, the way that we're trying to say something could be improved, maybe where we're advertising, maybe actually, we could go a step wider. Maybe there are certain things we can be flexible on, that type of thing, I think. But I think almost what you're saying is and kind of where I'm coming from, it's almost when we start that journey, I think we will start to, some of this will start to embed. So when we look at our current communications and we get some appropriate advice on actually, well, how could this be worded better? And we start to build on that experience and, what else is happening in the industry and across the board, that hopefully some of these questions will kind of be answered as we go along, maybe that we haven't thought about before. So hence, again, why I think, the training and education part of it might actually, when we look at these things, make us think a bit differently.
Yeah. Yes.
If we, perhaps if we take the LPSA guide to hand, we should ask a few systems like ChatGPT on how to recruit women. The evidence may be out there. Councillor King.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to come back, Chair. Just a couple of things. I very much agree with what you said about the role of the chair, or one of the roles of the chair, is to nudge people to reach a consensus. And I would like to see that included, absolutely, along with the other things I mentioned. As far as the recruitment process is concerned, I'm not sure if we followed the process that we did when I was chair and Rob was our support officer, because that was extremely successful. We got a good number of people with the necessary skills, and that was, and I'm delighted to say that the best of them was Val, and she has been a huge asset to the work of the pension board. So, Val, whatever we did then, I think it paid dividends. So I think that would be a good starting point. Thank you.
Barry, over to you.
I'm back to my point about fund appointments, but just thinking on it a bit more. So I'm going to use myself as a union representative as an example. So I have a bit like a councillor on a committee. I have a certain caveat to be able to represent people. I have to be in their workplace, so that's the first thing. But clearly, I might be representing employees of different genders and with disabilities, etc. So for me, it's more important that I understand their needs. So that's why I was talking about training being more important than actually being representative of the membership you're representing. So I'm just thinking about the wording, because the wording is talking about encouraging a diverse and inclusive pension fund committee and board membership. I'm just thinking maybe wording along the lines of that being an aspiration, and where that can't be achieved, that board members are like fully knowledgable of the scheme membership and are representative in that way.
Yeah, I can certainly have a look to see if we can expand that bit. I probably would just say, I think maybe the comparison you make with Unison in that respect is probably where the officer training in that particular context comes in. So obviously we want to make sure our board and committee members have training, but equally as important, we are obviously looking at what training is available for officers as well, to make sure on the ground level that actually the people that we're dealing with in terms of the membership, obviously we've got the right training at that level as well.
Michelle, can I just pick up the WCAG 2.1 and a query as to whether that should be 2.2 as we move forward. I think that may be an obligation from October, but I'll leave experts to check on that.
Yes, we will double check. Thank you.
Okay, we have been asked to review the actions, and I think we've done that fairly thoroughly. So thank you very much. The next item is the cash flow projections report. Corey, would you like to briefly present this one? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I will try to keep it brief while also giving an overview, because I imagine there might be some discussion around this afterwards. This is a report that was presented to the committee, bring them up to date on our cash flow position as a pension fund, and particularly looking ahead to when we think the fund might become cash flow negative. Now, the biggest thing I want to say about this is being cash flow negative as a pension fund is not a negative position overall. It's an expected part of the life cycle of a pension fund. As Mark said earlier on, the number of pensioners that we have in the fund is only going to keep increasing, and that is going to outweigh the number of active members that we have in the scheme. So therefore, when you're paying out more benefits than the contributions that you're collecting in, that means that the pension fund is in a cash flow negative position. And that eventuality is exactly why we build up the assets that we hold within the pension fund, so that we can start to draw down on them in that mature position and pay the liabilities from those assets. It's important to be aware of when that's going to happen so that you can plan for it accordingly, and that you can start to draw down from those assets in a controlled manner when it is most advantageous to the fund, rather than being a forced seller of assets when you find that you need them. This is something that is monitored on a daily basis, multiple times a day. In fact, we monitor the cash flow, and Mark might want to come in a little bit later on and say a little bit more about that. What you can see from the report, and I don't want to go over it too much because it is quite a technical report. There was a presentation given to the committee, which everybody was invited to, and hopefully that is available on video for you to have a look, with the actuary taking you through that report in detail. But in terms of the highlights, what you can see is there's 3 scenarios that were tested. These are the 3 potential extreme positions that we expect, so that we can interpolate between those. There is the baseline position, which is assuming that inflation is at a normal level. As you can see from that, that would expect us to be neutral in the short term and potentially becoming cash flow negative by 2030. There's also a recession scenario that has been looked at. Recession is probably a little bit misleading in terms of the title. It's actually a low inflation scenario. And you can see from the report that expects that we would remain cash flow neutral in the short to medium term. So we'd have roughly the same amount of contributions coming in as the amount of liabilities that we're having to pay out. And then the final position is a high inflation position, which you can see there, we would expect to be cash flow negative within the next couple of years, if that was the case. As I said, it's not anything to be alarmed about. It's a natural position. Being aware of when we can expect that to happen is the most important thing, and planning accordingly. This will feed into any decisions on strategic allocation, on cash flow management, which, as you're aware, we put a cash flow management policy in recently. That is all that I wanted to draw your attention to. Happy, obviously, to take any questions, and we can follow up if there's anything that you need from the actuary.
Thank you, Corey. No questions. Oh, sorry, Val.
Really just one question. It's just really something I hadn't really thought about until your presentation, Corey. You're talking about the possibility of having to liquidate assets with the access pool. How easy is it for us to liquidate assets fairly quickly if we actually need to do that?
Sorry, I was on mute. Mark might want to come in with a bit more detail on the access side of things, but as part of the cash flow management strategy, we do hold a certain level of cash on hand so that we can make those payments. We plan for what we think those cash flows are going to be. And as I said, there's a multiple day check on what those cash flow positions are so that we can take action. And we do have a certain amount of allocation in income generating and liquid assets, which is where I'd hand over to Mark for his expertise on that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, in the liquid space, you're talking about daily trading. So we can get money back if needed very quickly. And indeed, some of that money might be in money market funds with the custodian. So obviously there's a process whereby some money is temporarily held with a custodian so it can then be invested within the mandates. However, the likelihood of needing to liquidate assets is quite low, because the if you think back to the business plan, it's showing projected £50 million of investment income each year, and so with it's a treasury management software we have, so we can monitor multiple times daily what we have and what we project to need to pay out. We should always, with that amount of investment income, retain enough to be able to pay out whatever is needed. And again, thinking back to it was a refresh of the cash management strategy. When we presented that, we talked about the pension fund is a lot of it is around getting lots of money in towards the beginning of the month when contributions come in, and having the pensioner payrolls at the end, which is the big amounts out, and everything else is worked, and the flows are worked out around that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Safe.
Yes, thank you. I suspect that this is another report that we take in for information. There's not very much we can do about it. It's good to know that there is cash flow planning, and I suppose we would be more worried if there wasn't. But actuaries, of course, work in weird and wonderful ways that are not given to most people to understand. It appears that they've just taken in the if you like, what they've called the inflation scenario, they've just taken 1%, presumably an informed figure, to cover everything that might happen to investments across the board. I mean, I'm going to ask, is that what they've actually done, or have they gone into other aspects of forecasting, particularly over the long term? I'm going to be raising a little bit later one of the risks that investments may be subject to, which I don't think is on our risk list. You'll tell me that that's not the case when we come to it, because I think it's in the exempt section. But I mean, broadly speaking, how have they come to the figure that they have? Is it a much more detailed calculation than looking at the risk indicators to come up with what was it, 4.85? I haven't got it in front of me now, but whatever that's only one figure. That's only one level of sensitivity that they've looked at, isn't it? So, I mean, if, for example, it works out to be because there is a major crisis, oil or conflict or whatever, it's a much bigger impact on investments. How would that stack up? Bigger impact on investment income, not the value of investments necessarily.
Yeah, so talking in general terms about Hyman's approach, they have what they call the economic, it's ESS. I'm trying to remember what all the letters stand for in that. It's effectively they look at 5,000 different economic scenarios in the future, and model those. What they've done here is they've picked out what they believe to be 3 reasonable potential scenarios that might present themselves over that time. So no, they're not looking at the whole 5,000 in these, but this is being used as reasonable expectations to say what we think might happen in that time. Obviously, taking positions that are in 3 different positions in that. So as we say, low inflation, expected inflation, and then a high inflation scenario. If something wildly different to those was to happen, then of course there would be some difference here. But of course, we can't predict all of the future and account for everything, so we just try to extrapolate between those from these particular.
Yeah, thanks. No, I just wanted to understand the basis. Thanks.
Any more questions? And if not, thank you very much. We've been asked to note the contents of the report. And yes, if you have the time, the session was recorded from the committee, and that might be worth reviewing the video of that. So thank you, Corey. We now move on to the agenda plan. You'll note that this only goes to June. I have been reassured that as time moves forward and Michelle gets her hands on a number of the projects that are actually up and running, that it will be extended. So primarily we are being asked to look at the agenda for June. If anybody's got any comments on that. Barry?
Just, I know we raised it in the pre-meeting, but it should have the election of chair and vice chair as part of that agenda.
Yeah. Councillor King?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to query this, and I think we've had a discussion about this before, but does the whole risk register really have to be an exempt item? Because I'm not keen on exempt items in general, and I just want Mark perhaps to explain why he feels the whole risk register has to be exempt.
It's an exempt item around certain risks, which we wouldn't want in the public. We wouldn't want the detail of them in the public domain. Clearly, it's things like around the number of risks relating to cyber activity, etc., and things like that. So that's the rationale. I mean, obviously, the monitoring officer is the party has the ultimate decision as to whether something is exempt or not. I think it would become a quite considerable amount of work to separate out the components which are exempt and non-exempt on this. That would be I think that would be quite a tricky piece of work, bearing in mind the way we format it and the fact that we have multiple parts. So you'd probably have you'd have every single appendix duplicated, obviously, because you've got different components. So things like we've also introduced things like risk assurance, for example, which I can say in the public domain, and those kinds of things, they would all need to be in both as well. So that's the rationale, and it's what we do for both pension funds at the moment. Sorry, Michelle.
I just wanted to say, Mark, there. I mean, you said it's the monitoring officer's decision. It's their recommendation. It's our decision.
So to be clear, when any exempt paper, we obviously, it's clear to the statutory officer it's exempt, and we have to give the rationale. I think if it's a repeat report, obviously we don't have to keep repeating the rationale if the report contains the same information. But certainly at the beginning, when they first saw it, they would have had to understand exactly why it's exempt.
Michelle?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of points. So on that exempt item, I actually did, after the last meeting, have a bit more of a think about, as Mark said, about whether actually we could physically, split the paper. But it would be quite a considerable amount of work to do that, obviously, to have two separate, one in the public domain and one obviously exempt. The only thing I did think is maybe we can resolve to review at certain points as certain actions are completed, and maybe just, you know, say that we'll give you the assurance that we'll keep reviewing that decision based on what's in the risk register at the time and whether we feel that there's anything particularly that we don't in the public domain. But I think certainly at this point in time, it would be quite difficult whether we could extract, you know, certain bits out, possible, but probably quite problematic, I would say, at the moment.
Well,
Thank
I
you,
mean,
Chair. Thank you, Mark, and thanks, Michelle.
yeah, sorry, Councillor King. I was just going to say, I mean, you know, I think we could potentially have like the high level risk register with no detail at all apart from the scores in potentially in the public domain, for example. But then you would have the problem of, well, what about the recovery report? What is that? So it's a really tricky one, because I think ultimately I wouldn't have much of a problem if we had just our risk scores with no detail whatsoever. That clearly could probably go in the public domain. But I think when you we'll have another discussion internally to see if there is a way of doing it. And if you leave that with us, we'll see what we can.
We could possibly put an exempt appendix in, but again, you'd then be flicking between the public part of the meeting and then defer in certain bits. So, but as Mark says, we'll have a think, see if there's any way around that. And just my second comment, I just wanted to flag again that the effectiveness review at the point of writing this was going to be for June, but as mentioned earlier, in line with EDI, because we want to obviously do that in line and make sure we're being comprehensive with that, that will be pushed back to later in the year.
And I just wanted to add, if I may, Chair, that I think that, you know, I'm always conscious of the workload on Mark and his colleagues, and I certainly wouldn't support anything that significantly added to that. And, you know, I think just maybe doing a high level risk register in the way that Mark suggested, I'm not sure that really, you know, ticks my box. So I think, you know, I would reluctantly support that we continue as we are, but it's just that I like transparency, you know.
I'm Mark and Michelle, thank you very much. I am totally with Simon. I would welcome transparency, but I have no wish to make extra unnecessary work for yourselves or indeed for the board actually dealing with the matter. So thank you for having another think of it. I have to say that the risk register is actually, there is a version in public domain on the website. I can't say I've looked at what that looks like recently. Perhaps members would like to do that.
Yeah, the executive summary is what we publish. So there's a high level, what the risks are, but it's the detail behind it that we keep exempt. Yeah.
As I say, I can't say I've had a look at that. I think it would be no harm and have a look at what's on the website in total. However, this appears to be an appropriate time that we will now move to items for which it is necessary to exclude the press and the public. So this is a request to members. Do you agree to resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information.
Agreed, Chairman.
Yep.
Thank you all.
Agreed, Chairman.
As this is the final public item on the agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken the time to watch